The power of affirmations, as taught by Louise Hay, lies not in magical thinking or blind optimism, but in the deliberate and conscious reprogramming of thought patterns that shape our experience of life. Affirmations are positive, present, tense statements that declare a desired reality as though it already exists. This is not a denial of current conditions, but rather a tool for shifting one's inner narrative to align with healthier beliefs, greater self-worth, and more constructive emotional responses. In the context of Hay's philosophy, every thought we think and every word we speak is an affirmation. This means that even our unconscious patterns, our self-criticism, our doubts, our reactions, are reinforcing beliefs that, in turn, manifest as our lived experiences. For instance, a person who constantly thinks, "I'm not good enough," or "nothing ever works out for me," is affirming those outcomes whether they intend to or not. These internal scripts often stem from early childhood experiences, social conditioning, or repeated exposure to environments where negativity was normalized. Over time, such thoughts become entrenched as core beliefs, shaping everything from how we perceive ourselves to how we allow others to treat us. Affirmations, then, serve as a counterbalance to this unconscious programming. By choosing thoughts like "I am worthy of love," "I am confident in my voice," or "I deserve to be respected," we begin to create a new internal landscape. While the words alone do not guarantee instant change, their consistent repetition begins to soften the resistance within. The mind, when repeatedly exposed to new patterns, starts to accept them as familiar. Neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to rewire itself, supports this. Repetitive positive statements, especially when combined with emotion and visualization, begin to carve new neural pathways, replacing those conditioned by fear, shame, or limitation. From an educational standpoint, affirmations are a form of cognitive restructuring. They align with psychological techniques used in cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT, where individuals learn to identify and challenge distorted thinking patterns. Affirmations help replace negative automatic thoughts with balanced, constructive alternatives. While Hay's approach is rooted in metaphysical traditions and holistic wellness, its principles find support in contemporary psychology and neuroscience. What we repeatedly focus on, we reinforce. What we reinforce, we believe. And what we believe, we ultimately live. The power of affirmations also extends beyond the individual. When practiced collectively, affirmations can influence group dynamics, reshape cultural narratives, and disrupt toxic cycles. If an entire generation, for example, begins to affirm their inherent worth and dignity, it becomes harder for voices of mockery, belittlement, or superiority to dominate. Affirmations cultivate internal boundaries. They signal to the world what we will and will not accept. This is not merely self-help. It is quiet activism. It is an act of reclaiming one's voice and values in a world that often benefits from disempowerment. One common misunderstanding is that affirmations are about pretending things are perfect when they are not. But Louise Hay never suggested bypassing pain or denying reality. Rather, she encouraged us to face our experiences with honesty while simultaneously choosing a more empowered perspective. For example, someone in a difficult job situation might affirm, "I am open to new opportunities that honor my talents," not to ignore their current stress, but to begin attracting and recognizing healthier alternatives. The affirmation becomes a bridge between present discomfort and future possibility. The educational value in teaching affirmations is immense, particularly for young people, marginalized communities, and those healing from trauma. When someone learns they can challenge an inherited belief, be it from family, media, or societal structures, they experience agency. They discover that they are not prisoners of their past, but participants in the creation of their future. Affirmations become tools for self-definition, especially in environments where identity has been shaped by external judgment or control. Ultimately, affirmations help us take radical responsibility, not blame, for our thoughts. This responsibility is liberating. It empowers us to change the story we tell ourselves and, by extension, the reality we co-create. Louise Hay's legacy lies not in offering easy answers, but in giving us a deceptively simple tool with profound implications. Affirmations are not magic spells. They are psychological recalibrations. They are daily decisions to return to self-respect, to rewrite the internal dialogue, and to affirm, again and again, I am worthy, I am enough, I am free to change. Breaking the cycle of toxicity is not just an act of defiance. It is an act of education, self-preservation, and evolution. In the teachings of Louise Hay, we learn that repeated emotional patterns, especially those rooted in fear, resentment, judgment, or shame, form the foundation of our reality. Toxicity, when it appears in personal relationships, media, or social institutions, often goes unchallenged because it has been normalized over time. The language of ridicule, the culture of mockery, or the praise of dominance is not born overnight. It is learned, reinforced, and passed down until someone decides to interrupt the loop. Toxicity often presents itself as power. It can show up as the loudest voice in the room, the sharpest comment, or the cruelest laugh. Yet behind these expressions is often insecurity or pain, unacknowledged, unprocessed, and projected outward. When this behavior is modeled repeatedly by those in positions of visibility, it begins to look acceptable, even aspirational. Young minds absorb it as wit. Audiences confuse it with strength. But Louise Hay would ask us to look deeper. What part of us resonates with this energy, and what would it take to choose differently? The cycle of toxicity is sustained by unconscious participation. When we consume harmful content without question, when we allow dismissiveness in conversations, when we repeat jokes that diminish others, however subtly, we become part of the machinery that keeps this cycle alive. Awareness is the first step to breaking it. One does not need to shout or cancel others to make a difference. A quiet refusal to participate, a decision to turn away, to choose a different conversation, to speak truth with compassion. These are powerful acts of interruption. In educational contexts, it's essential to understand how cycles form and why they persist. Humans learn through repetition and modeling. If a child grows up hearing that cruelty equals control, they may carry that into adulthood, unconsciously replicating those behaviors. Toxicity often masquerades as humor or intelligence, but its true impact lies in its ability to diminish the self-worth of others while inflating a false sense of superiority. Breaking this requires both inner and outer work, recognizing the harm in ourselves and choosing not to perpetuate it in others. Louise Hay teaches that what we give out, we get back. This principle applies not only to individuals, but to communities and cultures. A society that consistently rewards arrogance, spectacle, or the belittling of others will continue to produce figures who embody those traits. But when awareness grows, when people begin to affirm values like kindness, respect, empathy, and authenticity, the social mirror shifts. What was once praised becomes outdated. What was once tolerated becomes unacceptable. This is not censorship. It is evolution through values. There is a misconception that rejecting toxic behavior is an overreaction, or that it lacks a sense of humor. But education reminds us that values are a choice. Just as we once accepted unhealthy practices in medicine, science, or governance until we learned better, so too must we upgrade our emotional and cultural intelligence. Breaking the cycle means becoming aware of how words carry energy, how tone shapes perception, and how repeated exposure to toxicity can numb our sensitivity to others' pain. Once we know this, we can no longer pretend we don't. Another critical dimension is self-reflection. Louise Hay emphasized healing not just the outer world, but the inner child, the wounded parts of ourselves that may have grown up surrounded by judgment or neglect. If we are drawn to toxic dynamics, it may be because they echo something familiar. The real work is not in blaming others, but in asking, what am I still carrying? What part of me needs healing so I can respond with integrity rather than reaction? In this way, every encounter with toxicity becomes an invitation, not to attack, but to grow. Ultimately, to break the cycle of toxicity is to reclaim choice. It is to say, I see what this is, I understand how it works, and I choose something healthier. This is not always easy, especially when toxic behaviors are glamorized, rewarded, or institutionalized. But Louise Hay's teachings give us tools, affirmations, self-love, forgiveness, and awareness. These are not weak responses. They are the foundation of lasting change. By choosing to no longer resonate with the frequency of ridicule or domination, we weaken its grip on the world around us. In that choice, we become agents of a more respectful, conscious, and kind reality. One affirmation, one boundary, one conversation at a time. Accountability is often misunderstood as blame, punishment, or public shaming. But in the teachings of Louise Hay, accountability is not about judgment, it is about awareness. It is a deeply personal process of recognizing our thoughts, emotions, and actions with honesty and without guilt. True accountability does not begin with pointing fingers at others. It begins with asking ourselves, what am I allowing? What am I believing? What am I reinforcing in my own life and the world around me? Through awareness, we step into a position of power, not to control others, but to redirect our own energy with intention. In many cultural contexts, especially where media and celebrity behavior influence public discourse, accountability is often replaced by spectacle. Someone behaves poorly, the audience reacts, and then a wave of backlash follows. But this reactive loop rarely leads to meaningful growth because it lacks depth. It centers around external consequences, not internal reflection. Louise Hay's approach challenges us to go deeper. Awareness, in her view, is not passive observation. It is the active recognition of patterns. Once we become aware of a behavior or mindset, we can no longer claim ignorance. From that point on, we are responsible for what we choose to do with that knowledge. Accountability through awareness shifts our focus from drama to development. It asks us to observe not just what others do, but how we respond. Are we silently endorsing certain attitudes by remaining passive? Are we absorbing negativity because it feels familiar? Are we defending toxic behaviors because they reflect our own unhealed wounds? These questions do not invite shame. They invite truth, and in truth we find freedom. As Louise Hay often said, when we know better, we do better. This is not a moral command, it's a spiritual principle grounded in the belief that we are always capable of change if we are willing to see clearly. Awareness is also the bridge between ignorance and wisdom. Many people act out of inherited beliefs, generational trauma, or social conditioning. They are not necessarily malicious, but unaware. That does not excuse harmful behavior, but it explains why transformation must begin with education. We cannot hold people accountable in meaningful ways without first helping them see what they have been unconscious to. In this way, accountability becomes a process of awakening, not punishment. It becomes about inviting people to look in the mirror with compassion, not contempt. This principle extends to collective environments as well. In workplaces, classrooms, and families, harmful behaviors often persist not because they are invisible, but because they are accepted as just the way things are. But when one person becomes aware, truly aware, they disrupt that pattern. Their awareness alone becomes a catalyst for change. They may choose to speak up, to set a boundary, or to model a different way of being. This is the beginning of cultural accountability, and it starts with individuals who refuse to look away. Louise Hay's work empowers us to understand that we are not victims of our environment, but participants in it. If we do not like what we see in our culture, Whether it is in the media, leadership, or entertainment, it is not enough to criticize it. We must ask, what am I giving energy to? What am I tolerating? What am I choosing not to confront? These questions are not comfortable, but they are necessary. They remind us that accountability is not about waiting for others to change. It is about becoming aware of our own role and then acting from a place of integrity. Importantly, awareness does not guarantee perfection. We will still make mistakes, we will still fall into old habits, but with awareness we catch ourselves sooner, we repair more thoughtfully, we choose differently next time. This is the heart of accountable living. It is not about never getting it wrong, but about continually striving to get it right in a conscious and compassionate way. In essence, Louise Hay teaches us that healing comes not through force, but through light. Awareness is that light. It illuminates the shadows within us and around us, making it possible to choose love over fear, truth over illusion, and growth over stagnation. Accountability through awareness is the pathway out of cycles of denial, defensiveness, and blame. It offers us the opportunity to rise, to live in alignment with who we truly are, and to hold others to that same standard, not with anger, but with clarity. And from that clarity, real change begins. Self-reflection is often perceived as a personal, even private act, a moment of quiet introspection, a pause in a busy life to consider one's emotions, choices, and direction. But in the teachings of Louise Hay, self-reflection is far more than a therapeutic tool. It is a revolutionary act. In a world that frequently encourages distraction, deflection, and external validation, the simple choice to turn inward and examine oneself honestly becomes a radical departure from the norm. It is not rebellion for its own sake, but a conscious shift away from reaction and toward responsibility, growth, and alignment with one's higher self. Louise Hay believed that every outer experience is a mirror of our inner landscape. What we experience in relationships, careers, and society at large often reflects our beliefs about ourselves. When we engage in self-reflection, we begin to see the roots of those beliefs. We uncover the childhood experiences that shaped our self-image, the cultural narratives that influenced our identity, and the fears or insecurities that quietly guide our behavior. To become aware of these hidden forces is to reclaim power. We are no longer victims of unconscious programming. We become conscious creators of our reality. From an educational perspective, self-reflection builds emotional intelligence. It helps individuals develop self-awareness, empathy, and resilience. It teaches us to pause before reacting, to question before judging, and to feel before dismissing. These are not just soft skills. They are essential components of ethical leadership, meaningful relationships, and social harmony. When people reflect deeply on their motives, words, and impacts, they begin to act more deliberately. They move from autopilot to intention, from reactivity to responsibility. In the context of broader societal patterns, self-reflection challenges the structures that perpetuate harm. Many dominant systems, whether in media, politics, or business, reward speed, spectacle, and surface-level thinking. These environments often discourage vulnerability, discourage nuance, and discourage emotional honesty. But when individuals choose self-reflection, they naturally begin to reject those shallow models of success. They begin to ask, what matters to me beyond appearances? What values am I truly living by? Who am I when no one is watching? These questions disrupt the conditioning that keeps people trapped in performance-based identities. Louise Hay emphasized that we can never truly love others until we learn to love ourselves. Self-reflection is the first step toward that love. It is how we meet ourselves without judgment, how we sit with the uncomfortable truths we might rather ignore, and yet it is in those truths that healing begins. When someone realizes, for example, that their defensiveness is rooted in old wounds, they can begin to soften. When they see that their criticism of others mirrors their own self-criticism, they can begin to forgive. This is not indulgence, it is liberation. The moment we take full ownership of our inner world, we cease to be controlled by it. It is important to understand that self-reflection is not about finding faults, but about finding patterns. Louise Hay taught that every thought carries energy. Reflecting on those thoughts helps us determine which ones are nourishing and which ones are draining. A person who constantly thinks, "I'm not good enough," will act from that belief, seek relationships that reinforce it, and tolerate environments that affirm it. But when that person reflects and recognizes the thought for what it is, a learned belief, not a truth, they gain the ability to change it. This is the revolution, shifting from unconscious belief to conscious choice. In educational and organizational settings, encouraging self-reflection leads to healthier cultures. When people reflect on how they communicate, how they manage stress, and how they treat others, toxic patterns begin to dissolve. It also opens the door to more inclusive and empathetic communities. Self-reflection teaches humility. It reminds us that we don't have all the answers and that being willing to learn from our mistakes is more powerful than pretending to be right. Ultimately, self-reflection is a daily discipline. It is not something we do once and complete. It is an ongoing relationship with ourselves. It asks us to be honest, gentle, and courageous. Louise Hay reminded us that change begins within. And when we commit to that inner work, not out of guilt, but out of love, we begin to live with greater clarity, authenticity, and purpose. In a world that often urges us to look outward for validation or to blame others for our discomfort, self-reflection remains a quietly revolutionary act. It is the moment we stop the noise, return to our center, and say, "I am willing to see this differently." And that willingness, simple as it may seem, is how revolutions of the heart, and ultimately the world, begin. Judgment is a reflex deeply ingrained in human behavior. We are trained from early childhood to evaluate others, how they look, speak, act, succeed, or fail. Judgment often feels like a tool of discernment, a way to protect ourselves or establish moral order. But according to Louise Hay's teachings, judgment is a double-edged sword. While it may offer temporary relief from our own insecurities or confusion, it ultimately reinforces separation between ourselves and others, between who we are and who we think we should be. Replacing judgment with compassion is not just an emotional shift. It is an educational transformation that reorients the way we relate to ourselves and the world. At its core, judgment stems from fear and misunderstanding. When we judge others, we often do so because they mirror something unresolved within us. Their behavior triggers discomfort, and instead of exploring that discomfort, we project blame outward. For instance, when someone expresses anger or vulnerability in a way that we find too much, we might label them as unstable or weak, without acknowledging our own struggle to handle intense emotions. Compassion, however, invites curiosity instead of condemnation. It says, "I may not understand your experience, but I am willing to believe it has value." In the context of personal development, Louise Hay reminds us that judgment is learned. It is not an inherent trait. We absorb it from caregivers, teachers, media, and social systems. We learn to judge bodies, accents, gender expressions, social status, even emotions themselves. These judgments become automatic unless we pause to examine them. Educationally, this is the foundation of emotional literacy, developing the ability to recognize a judgmental thought, understand where it came from, and make a conscious decision to release it in favor of something more constructive. Replacing judgment with compassion begins with the self. Many people walk through life carrying inner critics so loud and relentless that they assume judgment is just part of being human. But as Louise Hay taught, the way we speak to ourselves matters. Every thought is an affirmation, whether positive or negative. When we replace internal judgment with compassion, we say, "I am doing the best I can with the awareness I have right now." This mindset shift creates space for growth without shame, for change without punishment. It is not about lowering standards, it is about changing the energy with which we approach our evolution. Compassion is not passive. It does not mean we excuse harmful behavior or accept mistreatment. Instead, it means we seek to understand the causes of behavior before reacting. In educational or interpersonal settings, this shift can be transformative. When a student struggles, instead of labeling them lazy or defiant, compassion asks, what's happening beneath the surface? What support might they need? When a colleague lashes out in stress, instead of branding them difficult, compassion considers the unseen pressures they might be facing. This approach not only diffuses conflict, but builds trust, resilience, and emotional safety. On a societal level, judgment creates division. It fuels stereotypes, marginalization, and cycles of punishment. Compassion, in contrast, promotes inclusivity and justice. Louise Hay's philosophy aligns closely with trauma-informed care, a growing educational approach that emphasizes understanding behavior through the lens of past experiences, especially trauma and adversity. When we replace judgment with compassion, we acknowledge that everyone has a story, and those stories shape actions. This awareness does not absolve people of responsibility. It redefines responsibility as an invitation to heal rather than a demand to conform. Moreover, compassion is a teachable skill. Through mindfulness, empathy, building exercises, reflective writing, and open dialogue, individuals can learn to interrupt judgmental thinking and respond more thoughtfully. Educators, parents, leaders, and peers all play a role in modeling this shift. When children see adults respond to mistakes with patience rather than ridicule, they internalize that same kindness. When communities engage in restorative practices instead of punitive ones, they create cultures where accountability and care can coexist. Perhaps most importantly, compassion allows us to see others as whole. Louise Hay often said, "Every person you meet is a reflection of yourself." When we judge others harshly, we inevitably narrow our ability to understand ourselves. But when we extend compassion to those who struggle, to those who differ from us, and even to those who have caused harm, we expand our own capacity for empathy, healing, and grace. Replacing judgment with compassion is not weakness, it is wisdom. It is a conscious decision to view humanity through the lens of possibility rather than failure. And in doing so, we not only change how we treat others, we change how we live, how we lead, and how we love. Language is one of the most powerful tools we possess. It is not merely a means of communication, it is a mechanism by which we shape reality. The words we speak, both to others and to ourselves, carry energy, intention, and influence. Louise Hay taught that our thoughts and spoken words become the blueprint for the life we create. Through her groundbreaking work on affirmations, she demonstrated that language is not neutral. It can either be a tool of healing or harm, empowerment or limitation. Understanding and using this power consciously is one of the most important educational shifts an individual can make. The concept of affirmations may seem simple at first, repeating positive phrases to influence our mindset. But in truth, it is a deeply layered practice rooted in neuroplasticity, emotional regulation, and spiritual alignment. When someone says, "I am worthy," or "I am learning to love myself," they are not just uttering words, they are actively challenging old beliefs that may have been reinforced for years or even decades. Language becomes a form of internal reprogramming. It offers a way to intervene in the cycle of negative self-talk that so often governs our perception of self and potential. Many people are unaware of how frequently they use negative affirmations. Phrases like "I'm always late," "I can't handle stress," "I'm not good enough," or "people don't like me" are affirmations too. They are repeated thoughts that get internalized and eventually treated as truth. Louise Hay urged individuals to recognize this and become more intentional with their language. Replacing limiting beliefs with empowering affirmations is not about denial. It's about creating new mental habits that support growth. This process helps dismantle internalized criticism and replaces it with encouragement and self-trust. In an educational context, understanding the power of language is essential for developing critical thinking and emotional intelligence. When individuals become aware of their internal narrative, they begin to question the origin of those beliefs. Did I learn this from a parent, a teacher, society? Is it even true? This line of inquiry allows people to reclaim their voice and begin constructing a more authentic, supportive world. It also enhances the ability to communicate with others in a way that is intentional and compassionate. Affirmations also affect physiology. Studies have shown that self-affirmation practices can lower stress, improve problem-solving under pressure, and enhance performance. This happens because positive self-talk reduces the fight-or-flight response and allows the brain to remain more open and adaptable. Louise Hay was ahead of her time in recognizing that healing is holistic. It requires mental, emotional, and physical alignment. By using language that supports health, wholeness, and possibility, individuals begin to shift not just their mindset, but their entire way of being. It is equally important to understand that affirmations work best when they are grounded in self-honesty. Saying, "I love myself completely," when you are filled with self-loathing may feel disingenuous at first. That is why Louise Hay encouraged gentle, believable statements like "I am willing to learn to love myself," or "I am open to seeing my value." These phrases bridge the gap between where you are and where you want to be. They introduce the possibility of transformation, and that possibility is what creates momentum. Another essential element is consistency. Just as negative self-talk becomes habitual over time, so must the practice of affirmations. Repetition is not meaningless. It is the method by which the subconscious mind learns. Saying positive affirmations daily, aloud, in writing, or in thought, helps replace outdated belief systems and builds emotional resilience. This is not a one-time fix, but a daily discipline that gradually rewires the brain and re-centers the heart. Moreover, the language we use toward others matters just as much. When we affirm the strengths, efforts, and humanity of those around us, we contribute to a culture of encouragement rather than criticism. In homes, schools, and workplaces, affirmation can be a tool of connection and empowerment. It is a way to see people not only for who they are, but for who they are becoming. This forward-looking vision is at the core of any transformative educational approach. In conclusion, the power of language and affirmation lies in its ability to shape thought, influence behavior, and ultimately transform lives. Louise Hay's teachings remind us that we are never powerless. We can always choose a different thought, a kinder word, a more hopeful message. When we align our language with love and intention, we begin to create a life that reflects our truest self. That is not only healing, it is revolutionary.